All right, let's begin micro lesson 2.2. Welcome everybody and welcome to our asynchronous friends. So in this particular micro lesson, we're going to talk about how we can support monitoring progress, how we can foster self-assessment strategies, and look at some helpful tools that help students know what they're supposed to do, how they can succeed, regardless of the course modality. Students definitely need and or appreciate help before, during, and after the assessment processes. So we will, again, look at a whole bunch of strategies and do something fun, because fun is where it's at. All right. So because flexible course experiences may, and I know some of you will have less flexible course experiences in terms of student choice, but for some of you, students may be able to choose on a class by class basis whether or not they show up in the classroom or show up in the Zoom room or participate asynchronously. So giving students opportunities to monitor their own progress becomes more important, because they may be entering the stream in a very rough spot or a very calm spot, but they need to be able to see what's going on over time. So self-assessment activities provide opportunities for students to gauge their own progress without affecting their grade. It's important to let students know how completing these self-assessments help them, especially if they're for no points or low points. Students might skip them because they're busy. And also letting students know how they can use the results to improve. So some self-assessment examples include creating low stakes or ungraded quizzes, using surveys like we use in this group, and instructing students to score their own work with the rubric before turning it in. Maybe using reflection activities like something called an exam wrapper or an assignment wrapper, where students are answering reflective questions like, how did you study for this exam? How prepared did you feel? How did your results match your expectations? That kind of thing. There's a lot of good exam wrapper literature out there, and I recommend checking it out. When it comes to peer review, obviously that's an opportunity for students to give each other feedback and revise their work before turning it in for a grade. A lot of students are not used to giving constructive feedback, so conducting practice peer review exercises with mock submissions or anonymized submission from a student who gave permission is always helpful. You can also offer peer review worksheets or a checklist with prompts like, did your classmate show that they completed each step in the lab experiment? Did your classmate show how they solved each equation? Did your classmate support their argument and cite their sources? Depending on your discipline, there are different prompts that you would give for peer review. And I'm a big fan of not only talking about our students, but talking to them. So how can we engage students in A, making assessment more flexible, and B, making them ready for flexible assessments? And so in some cases, you might ask students to either help you weight the criteria in a rubric based on what they think is important for them in their lives or in their future goals, or maybe have them co-construct one criterion that you add to the rubric, and have it be a group exercise where everybody puts it in a discussion forum or a Google Doc, and students can vote, and you can maybe make it worth 5% or 10% of the total grade, but students are active participants in identifying what's important. You have your ideas based on the learning outcomes, and they have their ideas based on their lived experience. Similarly, for student-generated test questions, you can ask students to work individually or in small groups to create ideas for quiz questions. And if you've got a bank of questions, you can say, I'm going to take the top 3 questions and I'm going to put them in the bank. So you may end up with these questions. You'll already know the answers because we're talking about them as a group. It's a great way for students to study and identify what good questions might be. They may even generate questions very similar to ones you're already planning on using, but it's a way to involve students in preparing for flexible assessment. Other ways that we can help students prepare are related to helping them make sense of the results and take action, especially before a high stakes assessment. So if you use a quiz, then use the automated feedback in that quiz. At the bottom of each question, there are boxes, or at least one box, where you can give feedback. If you got this right, good for you. If you got this wrong, go check page 25 of the book. You need to read this section. You don't have to give them the answer, but you definitely want to give them an idea of where they should go to get on the right track. And so those automated feedback boxes at the bottom of each question in the learning management system, if you're going to use Play, Pause It or H5P, then you might have a little bit more trickiness to do it, but I have no doubt in the creativity of this group. And then also reviewing it with students after the fact, maybe creating self-organizing, self-assessment. Again, you could start a digital flashcard deck like I talked about before, Study Blue or Quizlet for each lesson or module, and have students add to the decks. So you would maybe do the first 2 or 3 cards and say, have at it. And then having self-assessment review sessions where students prepare for an assessment, use real-time self-assessment strategies that can be completed asynchronously. Last semester, I used what's called a virtual work sprint, where students would join me on Zoom specifically for 25-minute segments of getting ready for the final project in our class. So students would state their intentions at the beginning of that 25 minutes. And at the end, we'd take 5 minutes for a break and to see how we did. Help students become more self-directed learners and practice spaced study and repetition. And it gave me an opportunity to find out where students were struggling before we got too close to the due dates. Also, I think I mentioned on Tuesday, platforms like Kahoot or Poll Everywhere allow you to ask different types of questions during a live class experience, and students who watch the recording later can answer those same questions, adding their results to the polls or quiz analytics. So thinking about how we, again, span space and time with one strategy so we don't have to have our heads in too many places is always helpful. The next important thing for us to do is clarifying expectations, right? So with flexible course experiences, students will need help determining how things work compared to traditional or the online or remote class experiences they had in the past year and a half. If they're mode switching, where they are alternating their ways of participation, they may have a hard time finding their place or remembering what to do. So it means our instructions need to be crystal clear when we're putting them together for assignments and assessments. So including everything a student will need to be successful, but only what a student will need to be successful. The whole idea of Streamline is that we make sure they have all the stuff they need and nothing more. For Summarize, we want to make sure if the instructions are long, and maybe for a good reason, I'm a big fan of something called Too Long Didn't Read, or TLDR. You might have seen it. And I just finished a book that at the end of each chapter, they had a TLDR just to sum up what the chapter covered. And so you can do the same thing for your instructions. If you have a big set of instructions, break it down into some bullets and then have students read the details when they have time. And then maybe, again, we all use our syllabi as a way to let students know where they can go for help, but the students probably don't look at the syllabus as much as we'd like them to. And so having a need help section with just-in-time links to relevant support for our assignments and our assessments. If you're going to have some sort of research project, then link to the librarian chat line. Or if you're going to have students completing some sort of problem set in a STEM discipline, then having a link to the tutoring center. Always having a link to the technology help desks. And in some cases, if you're going to be using technology that students might not know very well, maybe a link to a video for a software tutorial. So to take this one step further, I want to take a look at something called the transparent assignment template. And I saw in the discussions that some of you are familiar with this. So maybe we can do a quick chat. If you've heard of the transparent assignment template, go ahead and put a yes. And if you have not, go ahead and put a no, Y or N in the chat. Looks to be about 50-50 right now in my calculator in my brain. Oh, one maybe. Oh. Thanks, Lynn. All right, so let's take a look because we have enough people who've never seen it before. So transparent assignment template in a nutshell is used as a guide for developing, explaining, and discussing class activities and out-of-class assignments. Building on the last slide, the template is designed to make each activity or assignment clear to every student. It does this by asking instructors to provide for each activity a purpose, a list of tasks to complete, and criteria or resources students can use to measure their success. And just as on a personal note, when I saw the research about this template, I adopted it. I went one summer, went through my entire course and converted every assignment and assessment instructions to use this template. And then I was wondering, well, how do I know if it worked? And what happened was that fall, I had a student take my class and he got an A, but he had failed it the semester before. And he sent me an email saying, I really appreciate you changing the way you wrote your instructions. I knew what I was supposed to do. So that to me was all I needed to hear. If I just helped that one student by doing this, it was worth it. So the Transparency in Learning and Teaching project, or TILT Higher Ed, is the website where you get it. Lalita asks, doesn't it look like spoon feeding? Well, Lalita, let's take a look. If you tell students why they're doing something, what they're supposed to do, and how they can be successful, I think you're not giving them any answers. You're just giving them a solid set of instructions. If I remember correctly, you're in engineering. And so you probably have seen some maybe IKEA furniture instructions that aren't so great and people don't know how to put things together. So we want to set up our students for success so that they can demonstrate knowledge and not get bogged down by aspects of the process that weren't made clear to them, whether it be a due date or anything else. Again, we have a lot of challenges in our lives. So we want to make sure we're focusing our attention on, do students have the ability to demonstrate that they have reached our learning outcomes? So I would say, it may look like spoon feeding on the outside, but I don't think it is. And I would love to have that discussion.
Right. I mean, I do these things, but still my colleagues, they always tell me it's almost like spoon feeding because I give them checklists to do. If I'm expecting certain things, and I ask students to attach that on top of their assignments, so that just make sure that they have done these 1, 2, 3, 4 things. And my problem is asking students to where to find answers. I kind of leave it to students, like they should be able to read the textbook and find out where it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody's works in their own way. And I can see a happy medium is something called scaffolding, where you might provide that checklist for the first 1 or 2 activities and then tell them to create their own for the activities after that. So if they thought it was a good practice, hey, make your own checklist and become a more self-sufficient learner. The thing we forget is many students don't learn how to learn. And so we want to,
yeah, that is absolutely.
So we want to provide them with structures that support them in, again, showing what they know without having extraneous variables being why they don't. All right. So because I am a classic type A overachiever, so I took this assignment template and their elements and I added to it. I kicked it up a notch if you listen to our friend Emeril Lagasse, the chef. So I like the idea of looking at the what, the why, and the how. And you may have noticed that I use these for the activities even in this institute. And so The transparent assignment template tells us to, for the what are you supposed to do? Let them know what the process is and let them know what the expectations are. I add to that, let them know what formats they can submit, because if we're going to increase flexibility, then we want to see if it's possible for students to submit things in multiple formats. For access purposes, it might be, hey, you wrote an essay, but you don't have a computer, so write it with pen and paper and use Google Voice and leave me a voicemail message where you read your essay and leave me a message, and I can use the same rubric to grade it that I can with a written essay. That's a way to support those students who may be stuck and don't have a computer. And Google Voice phone numbers are free. For the why, most of the reasons or purposes that we associate with why students are completing activities are associated with their learning outcomes. But I also like to pull in, hey, these skills are going to help you when you enter the workforce. These skills are going to help you reach some of your personal goals. So thinking in an expanded sense around why. And then last but not least, how. So the transparent assignment template folks talk about ways that the instructors can guide the students in how they can be successful. That might be providing examples of solid work. It might be providing a rubric. And so in addition to those things, I pull in those ideas that I brought up before. What are the academic support units, or what are the tutorials that might help them with background skills or technology glitches? And what non-academic support might they need? Right now, it's like hovering around 70% of students are experiencing high levels of anxiety and stress. So if our assignments are adding to that, do we want to make sure in our assignment instructions, feeling stressed about this activity? Here's an app for mindfulness or meditation, or here's the campus psychology and counseling services, or whatever it is that you feel your students might need, thinking through them as humans and not just the folks who are turning stuff in. All right, so again, I've done all the talking for the most part. And so the activity here, if you choose to accept it, if it seems like it will be helpful, there's a transparent assignment template worksheet that you can complete, and we'll get started now and start answering questions about it. So let's get the link to that. And while I do that, I open the floor for questions about this particular micro lesson. Janae talks about making expectations transparent can be considered an equity-based practice. You bet. First-gen students often don't have access to the same, what some people call hidden curriculum. Absolutely. Crystal backs that up. As a first-gen student, I had no idea what to do or how to do it, and wasn't comfortable asking. That is an assumption we all make, that students are going to ask if they don't know, and that's absolutely not true. And the more students are disproportionately impacted, the more likely they will not ask. And that's from the students themselves. Give me a second. Gonna let you work amongst yourselves while I find that handout. It's not popping up on my screen as quickly as I'd like. Almost there, folks. I just had to upload it a second time because I couldn't find it. All right. So in the chat is the link to the transparent assignment template worksheet that walks through the different aspects, the what, the why, and the how, and then gives an example of how you might situate it on a page to help students see it all in a glance. And we'll get started, but we won't have a chance to fill the whole thing out during this session. Janae brings up Michelle Pacansky-Brock and colleagues' article related to empirical evidence. And I'm guessing that's related to the transparent assignment template. And I see a recommendation for a Coursera course and other ideas from Troy, worknearyou.net, IKEA. I see that must have been in response to my comment about IKEA instructions. Okay, so, and I always save the chat, and again, your ideas are wonderful, and we will be adding them to the Keep Learning section of the course. Any last questions or comments about the transparent assignment template before we move on to our third and last section?
I have a question about the why. I feel like I'm just trying to think of like different sorts of like versions of this, and you know, one version would be sort of like leaving out the why so that students can fill it in. Like if you're told why you're doing something, like there's value in that, but there's also value in finding that meaning for yourself.
Or it could be a combination.
Right, yeah.
So, and if you remember from my slide, the easiest thing that may be hardest for students to find on their own is the connection between an activity and either a module level outcome or a course level outcome. And especially if you're in week 10 of a 16 or 17 week course, trying to figure out which course level outcome from the syllabus this activity is going to help you reach might be a stretch. So you might fill that in, but then in order to increase motivation by making it more meaningful to them personally and their lived experiences, you can say, what are some other reasons why this activity will support you in your future goals, in your workforce aspirations or whatever. So having them fill in some aspects, especially those connections to their own lives, is fantastic and a great equity strategy, as some people have been pointing out in the chat.
Thank you, Kevin.
You bet. All right. I'm going to officially close section 2.2